Welcome to the Displaced Curators Talk with guest curators Kanani Miyamoto and Lehuauakea. My name is Victoria. I'm the Learning Coordinator at Five Oaks Museum, and we are super excited to hear from the curators tonight about the process of creating the exhibition and getting a virtual tour. So let's get this conversation started. You have done a lot of connecting with community, historical research, and of course, curating all of the elements together to create this dynamic and cohesive exhibition. But you are each artist as well and have your own creative practices. Will you share with us a little bit about your individual art practices and how this project has interacted with or expanded upon the rest of your work?
As Victoria said, I'm a printmaker and muralist, and the work I'm most passionate about is projects I do that address the Indigenous perspective. For example, I've done an installation in the Portland building called The Industry of Aloha, and it kind of addressed issues of tourism and its negative impact on the land and culture. And then I did another exhibit in Maui called Disrupting the Gaze, which focused on institutions and the problems that we have by kind of idolizing artists such as like Paul Gauguin and just starting discussions about colonialism and things like that in the institution. This exhibit, I think, for a lot of times with projects like that, I feel like my perspective wasn't understood because of that kind of lost history, because we haven't been able to tell our stories and our perspectives. So for me, this exhibit kind of boosted my confidence and let me know that there is a place for these conversations, and they're important, as well as building community. And I've learned so much through Lehua's research and writing. So I think that is the biggest thing it's brought to my practice.
As Victoria mentioned, my name is Lehuauakea. I'm from Mokuokeawe, or the Big Island of Hawaii. I do have an art practice. I consider myself a kapa maker before I am a fine artist. And for those who might not be familiar, kapa is a traditional textile that has been largely dormant in Hawaii for many generations and was recently brought back into practice by the work of very dedicated practitioners back in the 70s during the Hawaiian Renaissance. This practice of making this important bark cloth textile from the trees that we have in Hawaii has been dormant in my own family for at least 7 generations. And so I am the first kapa maker in 7 generations, which I plan to not be the last. And this textile was used for burial practices. Our newborn children were born into this cloth. And we also used it for ceremonial purposes, bedding, and garments. And so we really lived our lives within and around these textiles before the introduction of cotton and other Western textiles in the 1800s. And so bringing that work back into play, into common everyday use, is a huge part of my work. But it doesn't just stop with the textiles. It's a whole world and paradigm of work that needs to be done, from the way that we raise the trees, the way that we tend to the land that they grow on, the dyes and natural pigments that are used to tell stories on those textiles, and the patterns that I carve into the stamps that I ultimately use to decorate the textiles with. So that all fueled its way back into Displaced, because as I found through my own personal research and my own work in bringing bark cloth back into use in my own family, there was a lot of missing pieces and a lot of voids within the histories that I was trying to put back together. And when I originally kind of proposed the show to Five Oaks, it came out of a place of acknowledging where these gaps were in our personal stories and our personal narratives within our communities. And so that all fueled its way back into Displaced by not only telling these stories that are largely underrepresented or inaccurately represented, but also uplifting the voices of the community that these stories belong to and their ongoing histories and stories. And so we wanted to put that work back into the exhibition because it comes from such a close, important place in our own personal lives. So that's a little bit about my practice and how it fueled its way back into the exhibition that we have online today.
So I'm hearing connections between, for you, Kanani, a sense of community and confidence in your work and its sort of place in this history and the community in the area. And then for Lehua, there's a real sense of like revitalizing, bringing back to life these practices like both of kappa and traditional practices and the land paradigm that you mentioned, back into everyday use. And I think that Displace does that as well. It's bringing these practices and the community to people's attention. And yeah, like you said, filling in that missing piece in the stories. The Coalition of Communities of Color created a report a couple of years ago that specifically looked at data about communities of color in Washington County, Oregon, which is where Five Oaks Museum is located. And one of the things that really stood out in that report to me, and something that you've included in the exhibition text, is that people of Hawaiian and Pacific Island descent are the fastest growing demographic group in this area. And in fact, the fastest growing demographic group in the US overall. That was a new perspective for me at the time and gave me such an important reminder about the significance of these communities. Before the two of you created this exhibition, what is your impression of what most folks know about the history and culture that Displaced celebrates?
So I guess speaking from personal experience, Kanani and I are both part of that Hawaii to Pacific Northwest diaspora. And so we've seen the effects of, inaccurate stigmas about our people and our communities in both places. So yeah, do you want to speak on that a little bit, Kanani, or we can kind of back and forth, whatever works?
Yeah, sure. Well, I moved here from Oahu. It's going on 9 years now I've been here. And I knew before I came that there was a big presence from people from Hawaii living here. I didn't know how big, and I didn't know how comfortable I would be here, being able to find my own foods, being able to find the music, the culture. But I was really happy to find that. But I had no idea of the history and why there were so many of us here, and I did not know until we started doing the research for this exhibit. So I'm so thankful to have that knowledge too, But while I was living here, encountering place names like Aloha or Kalama, I was always curious on where these names came from, why they were here, if they were even, Hawaiian words. So learning about that stuff and researching all of that was really interesting. And I feel a lot of people who live here now didn't know the history,
Yeah, it hits close to home when you're actually part of these communities, like me and Kanani. And so for me, when I've been here about the same amount of years, I've been here about 10 years now. But I was also born in Portland, which is an interesting complexity that I have. But I was raised my whole life on the Big Island with my whole family and my grandparents. So coming here and seeing how difficult it was for me to transition back, since I'd only lived in Portland for a couple years before being completely raised back home in Hawaii. I struggled to find my voice. I struggled to find, like Kanani said, my foods, my familiar foods. Like, it took me years to find a good poi source here on the Northwest, which we did actually feature in the exhibition. Seattle Poi Company, mahalo to them. I'm so grateful for their work supplying us with good mea'ai. But even finding a hula halau was difficult for me, and we wanted to offset that displacement, but also share the challenges of that displacement that we feel, because like Victoria said, we are the fastest growing demographic in the region and in the country known as the United States here on Turtle Island. So we know that we're not the only ones, but it took us personally, the both of us, years to find our voice and our footing and grounding as mixed Kanaka Maoli here in the region. So with Displace, that is also where the name of the show came out of. Displace meaning a direct reference to the displacement of our people from our traditional homelands, not just in Hawaii, but from all around the Pacific. A lot of people from the Hawaii to Pacific Northwest diaspora are not just Hawaiian, but Filipino, Japanese, Chinese, from all over. And so we wanted to acknowledge and address that displacement, but also how we can combat that displacement through the power of our community. And so that's really the underlying goal of this show, and how we were able to infuse our own experiences with the goals and themes of the exhibition, because there's a lot of commonalities between our stories and those that we highlighted with our artists and our storytellers and the musicians that lent their voices to this exhibition.
And historically too, like when, we were learning about the stories of the first here, talking about not having the proper clothing and things like that, like, those connections were pretty incredible to learn about.
Yeah, I can hear that there's a real connection of the experience no matter where in time it happened, whether it's in the 1700s or whether it's today. Folks coming from Hawaii to the Pacific Northwest are still encountering the same difference in the climate and in the foods. But now there's so much community here to connect with. I love imagining someone visiting the Displace online exhibition and then finding out, like, oh, I can go to this restaurant or, oh, I could join this halau, finding community through the exhibition. So Lehua, you took on the research for this exhibition, and I have to say what you accomplished is really amazing. It's very comprehensive, but also easy to read and understand. As you were doing all of the research work, did you find that there were gaps or other barriers that you encountered?
Yeah, so a lot of gaps and a lot of challenges, but none of which were insurmountable to this project as a whole. We definitely had to reach out to resources that maybe I wouldn't have normally considered myself if I wasn't doing a project of this nature or this scale. And so I was able to find even articles by digging through online archives, and even a few articles by Native Hawaiians who are part of this diasporic movement that spoke to the exact themes that we are addressing here. I did find several amazing printed resources of books. However, neither of those were written by Hawaiian scholars or Hawaiian authors. And so that is something that we as Native people especially, and POC, really have to work to dismantle, but also take with a grain of salt in doing our own research, because they are not written from our own voices or our own perspectives. And that is something that has been historically problematic, especially with anthropological research and historians throughout history. And so with this work and the way that I phrase things, or the terminology that I used, it was very important for me to acknowledge that we are on native lands that are not necessarily always called the United States, for example, or Canada. And in doing so, I reclaimed my agency as a Native person to tell these stories, but not only my own, by also uplifting and sharing this platform with the rest of my community in whatever ways possible. So I would even say that the research was not only limited to like archival digging and historical photographs or book reading. The research was also uplifting the stories of like our musicians who have amazing personal narratives that are featured in the exhibition, or the artwork that we received, and some of which came from direct communication with these community members. And so I count that as research too, because even the term research is kind of a dirty word for Native people, because oftentimes we are the subjects, not the authors. And so this exhibition, with the opportunity that we got from the Five Oaks Museum to kind of reverse that and give power back to these largely marginalized or underserved voices, that was our way of challenging that and overcoming the challenges of misrepresentation or lack of representation as a whole. So this is our form of research. It's not just limited to institutional or academic type research in the traditional sense. It goes much further beyond that, especially for our Kanaka-Maoli and mixed communities here in the Northwest with this exhibition.
Thank you so much for pointing out how you sort of expanded an interpretation of what research is through your process of creating Displace, and took on sort of a project of, it almost sounds like translating works or documents that might be written by like non-native authors, and then also having the opportunity to author your own. So you two began this project at the beginning of March in 2020, earlier this year, which turned out to be an auspicious time. As the pandemic took shape around us, we eventually accepted that this exhibition had to be entirely online. Now that it's come into the world this way, what are your reflections on the significance of having an online exhibition?
Accessibility is huge, right? This exhibit is so easily visited by everyone, everywhere, worldwide. So that has been pretty significant.
Yeah, on the note of accessibility, that's something that we encountered through the curatorial process of selecting artists and contacting folks for stories. A lot of people, especially those in POC marginalized communities, feel that they don't belong in a museum context, or that their artwork isn't important enough to be featured in a gallery type setting. And that is something that we as curators adamantly fight against, and wanted that to show in the resulting exhibition that we put together as a whole. And so we wanted to make sure that not only was the final product going to be accessible online in a digital sense, but that people who were applying to have their work shown would have as much access and feel welcome to do so as much as possible. So we took on several different modalities of accepting and calling out for artists, reaching out to folks directly, taking into the fact that many of these artists and individuals have never been in a gallery show before and may have never even set foot in a gallery prior to the pandemic. I know that the challenge is definitely real these days, but that is something that we wanted to actively work against and uplift the voices that may not otherwise feel welcome to do so.
Some of a really great thing that came from transitioning to fully online also was taking some of the costs that we would have, some of the budget we would have used for a physical exhibition and putting them into other projects like Lehua's Pacifica Award and things like that. Like, you know, that project, I hope that you talk a little bit more about that tonight, Lehua, but that project will last, you know, for a really long time, for generations maybe. So that's a pretty significant thing that came from transitioning to online.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to also consider the longevity of this work, for it to live outside of the digital context. And so, like we touched on before, community building, for those who are new to the region, maybe finding resources. There is a list of resources for further research and further community connection at the end of the exhibition. And that list is ongoing, for anyone who would like to add onto that, or you know, maybe another resource for people to look at, another book, another article, organization, hula halau. Please reach out to us. We are always open to adding to that. And like Kanani mentioned with the Pacifica Action Award, that is a new initiative that I'm starting for our Pacifica communities here in the Pacific Northwest, specifically Oregon. That is a new award program that is designated for graduating high school students of Pacifica ancestry. So those who are displaced from their original homelands around the Pacific, who are going on to continue outside of high school their community activism or cultural practices, not necessarily in an academic setting, because we strongly recognize that the work of our communities goes so much further beyond just carrying on to get a college degree. It can be used for those purposes. However, our work is so much further beyond that. And so there is going to be more info. We can drop the link in the chat as well to donate. But like Kanani said, this exhibition, we really wanted to consider how it can live beyond the digital realm, how it can live beyond the gallery and the museum walls, because that is really where the work has not only come from, but where the real work outside of the exhibition continues to carry on. So
I'm so glad you got a chance to talk about the Pacifica Action Award. We will drop that link in a moment. So it sounds like having the online exhibition opened up the accessibility of it, not just for the audience and the viewers, but potentially for the artists and participants in the exhibition as well, to be able to see themselves in a sort of gallery space. And that's really exciting that this project will have longevity through the Pacifica Action Award as well. All right, my next question is kind of a big one. It is, what was the overall process of creating this exhibition together? How did you source the content and decide what to include? And are there any favorite moments or unexpected challenges that you encountered along the way? You can start with the first one. I can remind you of the other ones later. What's the overall process of creating this exhibition together?
Mahalo for that. So to begin, like Victoria mentioned, we applied for this show early in 2020, and we originally applied as separate proposals for different exhibitions. However, we were made aware that our proposals kind of had a lot of overlap to them. And so we decided to combine our exhibition proposals into one. And that became Displaced as you see it today. It took a lot of different twists and turns, especially since we had to adapt to the needs with the coronavirus and still wanting to increase accessibility for everyone, even though the museum was closed now. So that's how it started. Do you want to add anything to that, Kanani?
I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. There was just a lot of back and forth between us. And when I applied for the guest curatorialship, I applied for the art section. So I was really intimidated with the historic research and the writing component of this really big exhibition. So being paired up with Lehua was really great, you know?
Yeah, I feel like both of our skill sets really complemented each other. I'm definitely in addition to being an artist, I'm definitely like a total research book nerd. When it comes to that sort of thing, I definitely go down a rabbit hole and end up at 1 a.m. in some weird archive website that looks like it's from the 90s. So that's definitely right up my alley, and you can see, I think, the passion for that comes through in the writing that I did for the exhibition. And then Kanani, with all of her community connections and experience as an educator here in the Northwest for almost a decade, she was able to provide a lot of community outreach and connections to contact artists directly who may not have applied to our open call, working with the students at Pacific University, folks directly at Pacific Northwest College of Art, and then working with different smaller organizations throughout the Portland metro area. We kind of tag teamed that together, and we just kind of went a lot of, like she said, back and forth to really fill in the gaps wherever we saw them needing to be filled.
It was definitely a challenge with coronavirus, you know, trying to connect with the community. And I always talk about it, how like, you know, normally I would just go visit someone, like go to their work or go to their office and, you know, talk with them. But you know, going back and forth with emails and texts and, you know, direct messages in Instagram, like it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, we definitely had to get creative with how we approached it. It was not in any way, I don't think, how either of us expected the process to go, especially since we initially applied thinking that we would have a physical exhibition. And as the months progressed after March, that became more and more clear that that was not going to happen. And so we still wanted to put together something that was super meaningful to the both of us, but also our whole community, that they felt a part in it. And so we definitely had to get creative with like all the different emails, phone calls, texts, messages, and yeah, it was a challenge, but something that I think the both of us were able to tag team and be able to handle in a positive way in response to the restrictions of coronavirus. And in this way, without having it be a physical exhibition, we were able to allocate funds to all of our contributors and to the Pacifica Action Awards, and increase accessibility for everyone all at the same time. So it was, in a way, a blessing in disguise. and also a testament to the resilience of our Pacifica communities here in the region, who have always found a way, one way or another, to connect with each other and find community, even 2,000 miles away from home or more. So
I think that you did a great job of covering all the questions, even when I only followed up with the first one. So yeah, you talked about how you sourced the content and all of the challenges that you encountered along the way. So I'm going to come to our last question, and it is about the key takeaways. This exhibition weaves together so many elements and perspectives, and I think that visitors will all relate to it in different ways. If there was one core theme that you'd really hope that anyone spending time with the exhibition could take away from it, what would that be for each of you?
So I kind of touched on it briefly earlier, but coming out of the name of the exhibition, Displace, referencing the displacement, but also the pigeon that has come out of Hawaii language, culture, and also Chinook jargon here on the coast, which was its own version of pigeon amongst native tribes here on Turtle Island. We wanted to acknowledge that displacement, but also at a higher level, acknowledge that the best ways and the most powerful ways of combating those feelings and challenges of displacement were through the power of community and connecting with others with similar stories and backgrounds. So that is, for me, what I hope to put forth in the writing, the research, the curatorial choices, even coming down to the name of the exhibition. So yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it was a lot about giving artists and musicians and our community, and the hula halaus, the food vendors, all of them a platform, and kind of highlighting like a more contemporary, more authentic people from Hawaii, not your Hollywood version, and recognizing our diversity too, right? Like so many of us are mixed, and so many of us maybe are not even Native Hawaiian, but we still have like this strong connection to the islands and the culture.
Yeah, there's so much overlap between all of our communities, and even for Kanani and myself, we come from so many different backgrounds, and for us to say that the Hawaii to Pacific Northwest diaspora is solely concentrated on Hawaiians and Kanaka Maoli moving between these two places, that would be perpetuating the histories that further leave gaps in those narratives. And so it is not limited to Kanaka Maoli. I am not just Kanaka Maoli, and so many other people are not either. And so we wouldn't be here today without the community as a whole, mixed or otherwise. It is all important, and all of these stories deserve to be told. All of these voices need to be heard. And so that is something that we wanted to prioritize with this exhibition and provide a platform for, and share that platform as curators. Because the work I do as a kapa maker, the work Kanani does as a printmaker and an educator, none of this would be possible if it weren't for the many, many, many hands that contribute to the work of our community as a whole. And so that is really what this exhibition is about.
What a beautiful wrap up, Lehua. That was great. All right, so those are all of our questions for the conversation. What is going to happen next is Lehua and Kanani are going to take everyone through a walkthrough of the online exhibition and share about the themes and connections between the history, stories, and artwork. And then after the exhibition walkthrough, we will end with an audience Q&A.
All right, so for the exhibition, it is, like Victoria said, it is all online, and all of the content, all of the stories, artists, narratives, and research is available through the webpage, and it kind of flows, as you'll see as I'm walking through it. So we start here. This would be as if you're walking through the gallery doors. This is the opening of the exhibition. We begin with a little background on the show, an introduction from Kanani and myself, and some information about us as curators and our own art practices. And then if you'd like to visit each of the artists directly, we have individual artist pages and storyteller pages for each contributor. And so quick links to these are found directly below on the first page of the exhibition. For example, I'm just going to click the first one here, Forrest McGarvey. We have info about each artist, their name, their ethnic background, a little bit about their bio, and then their work here. You can also click to enlarge each image, and some of them are very large, showing a lot of different details here, as you can see. And a lot of our artists have included little descriptions of their work, which are available below the images of their work themselves. We also have storytelling narratives from several of our musicians and community organizations. I'll click this one, Nā Homana o Hawaii at Pacific University. This is the Hawaiian Students Union or group at Pacific here. Here's their community stories, which they have all provided themselves. We tried to edit as little as possible to keep their stories as authentic as they came to us originally. And so here we have stories from several of the members, and we also were able to take photographs of each of these students and some of these storytellers and musicians as well, which are embedded within the actual exhibition itself.
In the artists, in a lot of the artists' profiles, also there's a little bit of information on why we chose the work, and it's their story's importance to us too. I think is a really interesting component.
That info will be, those curatorial notes are not yet up on the website.
They are.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, I saw them.
I didn't see them. Maybe I missed it. Oh, I didn't scroll far enough. There it is. So this is at the bottom of each artist page, we have notes from Kanani and I about why we chose each artist and how they related to the themes that we were trying to address with the exhibition as a whole. Here's a little bit about how to navigate the exhibition, but I'll also walk you guys through that as we talk here. A little opening video from my travels and how it links to home and the topic of home. And this is the main gallery page of the exhibition. So you can quick link to each section of the exhibition if you'd like, or as I'll show you in a minute here, we can walk through the exhibition from start to finish without skipping any of the pages in between. The nice thing about the main gallery page is that you can see, if you scroll from top to bottom, you can see the embedded artist images as you work your way through the historical content, which is something really nice to contextualize not only the research, but also the work that came out of our community on these themes of displacement and family, cultural identity, and the challenges that may be embedded within each of those themes. So I'll start. Oh,
I want to add too that there is a very intentional order of everything too. So if you do have time to go through the exhibit, you know, it's nice to kind of check out that flow of the gallery space, virtual
yeah.
gallery space.
Yeah, imagine it as if you were walking down a wall or through a room and you're walking your way around the perimeter of a gallery. And this exhibition from start to finish would be as if you're walking through the open doors around the perimeter of the gallery space and back out into the world. I'll start with the timeline since this one is a little graphic that we put together. This contextualizes all of the content from start to finish of the exhibition. So it's a timeline of the connection between Hawaii and the Pacific Northwest through the early 20th century. And this walks you through important historical events that have played an important, significant role in the histories that are continuing to be at play today. And so we begin with the first, besides pre-contact Hawaiian civilization, we begin with the first contact of Western ships in 1778. We work our way all the way through the early 1900s with the complications of immigration to the United States. And so that is a really informative graphic that you can pull up and have in another tab, or you can also save and use to reference throughout the exhibition, which is a really nice tool to understand, but also summarize all the little important bits. And so we have our historical pages have a combination of textual and photographic research. And this is something that is kind of like my child. I put a lot of work into all of these research bits, and each section is kind of grouped into a timeline along the lines of the timeline graphic that I just shared. And so we're able to click each image for a larger image here if you'd like to zoom in on the thumbnails that are embedded in each page, little captions that describe the images above. And important info has been bolded to make reading a little bit easier. So if you scroll through here, you can read through about all the different historical bits and evidence that we have. And then at the bottom of the page, it takes you to the next, either the next historical section, or you can jump back to the main gallery page that I began with before we started walking through the content. So this is the graphic again. And then it takes you through the next history page. And you can also view the timeline as a PDF file. And I believe you can actually download this to your own computer for reference throughout the exhibition or on your own time as well, which is a great tool for keiki who are learning and might not want to read all of the text. It's a great tool to summarize all of the important info as well. And so working our way through history, we have Kanaka and the trade expansion here on the West Coast, which they played an important role in not only the fur trade, but timber, canning, salmon canneries, even railroad building as well, and eventually the California Gold Rush also. So we were able to source some items from the Five Oaks Museum collection, which is really amazing that they had these resources available to us for this exhibition. We have a map of the region in that is kind of highlighted in this exhibition. This is from 1790. So just to put this into perspective, this map was made only 12 years after the first contact of Westerners in the Hawaiian Islands. And so by this point, there were already Hawaiians in the Pacific Northwest in these very regions that you see highlighted in this map. So that's kind of interesting. And it shows the trade routes that were possible during that time. We have important historical figures such as John Cox or No Kane. He played an important role, as you'll see here in the content here. I don't want to go too far into depth for time's sake. But each section is kind of cordoned off with a title and usually a date kind of grouping to make it easier for reading. And again, we have all important, really important info highlighted or bolded here, which is an important way if you're trying to skim through the exhibition or take your time with it. We wanted to make it accessible to readers of all different levels. And so we'll just click through here. Again, we have all this different historical context and info. And after this one, I will kind of go back to the main gallery page so that we can look through our artists. There's a lot of historical content here since we did do the research for about 2.5 centuries of history. And we would like to highlight all of those stories without conflating them or presenting any as less important, because all of it is important. So, as you can see, embedded within the history pages, we have our artists here. And each of our artists, we would definitely recommend that you take the time to read through their stories, look at their work, the mediums that we all chose, and Kanani can speak to this a little bit as well, but we wanted to highlight as many different media as possible, because so many of our community members don't just do, you know, painting or drawing in the traditional sense. They're doing experimental works with cyanotypes here, as you can see with Kia's work. We have digital media, digital collages, even video, printmaking work, and film photography. So there's a large range that we wanted to highlight here, each of which have their own important stories. Did you want to say something on that, Kanani, or kind of go through our artists?
No, I think you're doing a great job. Yeah, that was really important for me, right? Like having a wide range of artists and community members as well, right? The stories. Musicians, finding musicians was really important to me because music's so important in our culture. And then, yeah, making sure we included artists who, like we said before, are not necessarily Native Hawaiian, but you know, they share the culture.
Yeah, and on the note of music, you know, we did actually place a whole contemporary section on the role of music in the region today within our communities. And so some of these stories come directly from those who performed at our opening event. If you were there for that, mahalo for coming through. We would have loved to share those sounds and stories with you in person, but we were very much grateful for all those who came through on the digital platform. And so this page kind of talks a little bit about those. And for, as I mentioned before, we have personal narratives from a lot of our contributors. And if you click here, we have graphics for each of those stories. This one in particular is for Kyla, or Miss Killa, and this is her personal family story, how she began playing music, her background, connections to her Canadian-Ukrainian family, as well as her Mokuokeawe family, which is also where I'm from, Big Island family. Whoop. So yeah, there's a lot of embedded content within each page, which is definitely worth taking the time to work through. We were also able to take some portraits of our contributors, a few of our contributors who share their personal stories, which was a very wonderful opportunity that we were able to do with the funding that we got for this exhibition, instead of putting it towards a physical build out, which was really special. So I'll continue to go through. We also have a couple of videos embedded within the main gallery page from our artists and contributors. This one, for example, is from Lehuauakea Matsui. She's a lei maker up in, I believe, Seattle area. And so it's really neat to see these videos and this work in relation to the history and the personal stories that are before and after. So continuing on, you can see more artists are embedded here, those stories from our musicians that we just went through. And we also have thumbnails that if you'd like to click on our artist pages, you can see their work directly embedded and enlarge them here. Hey, uncle. And then if you'd like to click on their work specifically and look at their artist page and their bio, the curatorial notes behind our choices, you can click their name and that will take you to their actual page itself with all their work and all their content. We also have a food section, and food is a super important part of our communities. And this page, Mixed Plate, talks about the background of some of our favorites from back home, how they came to be. For example, lomi salmon here, lomi salmon was a direct byproduct of the fur and salmon canning trade industries up here in the Northwest, which is really interesting to read through the histories of it, the history of spam in the islands, how the plantations have played a role in the very unique combination of cuisines that we have. And then we also featured some cookbooks that we got from one of our family contributors, and their story is featured here as well. Suzette Cuizon and Nev Fall, their family came together and presented us with a wonderful cookbook and the background behind all the different family recipes and how they've carried on their history as part of the Filipinx diaspora up here in the Northwest and their connections to Hawaii as well. We also featured a couple of eateries and restaurants here in the region, specifically in the Portland metro area. We wanted to highlight a couple of local businesses that we personally are patrons of and want to support. So if you have the means, if you live here in the area, please go support them. They are doing wonderful work, staying true to our authentic flavors and definitely doing all of their food with aloha and kindness and care during a pandemic. Here is Seattle Poi Company that I mentioned earlier. All of their kalo is from Kauai specifically. So it's always nice to have food from back home, but have access to it up here. And Yeah, we'll go back to the main page.
Thanks for walking us through the exhibition, Lehua. I think let's scroll down to your conclusion and then maybe touch on that, and then we'll move on to our audience Q&A.
Yeah. My internet would like to load faster. So we have a community page. This is a little bit about, what I mentioned before, the resilience of our communities, especially during pandemic times. If you'd like to reach out to us to add further connections, organizations, or resources for further learning, please do. This list here is a growing resource page. And yeah, I think ultimately, this exhibition, this quote here is an olelo no eau, which is a Hawaiian proverb. It's a traditional saying that we have in my culture. And I think this show as a whole really speaks to the fact that any distance is ignored by aloha, or the love of community and land and culture. So yeah, any questions? How do I stop screen sharing? Cool.
We've got one question in the chat to start us off. Can you speak to the triangle motifs that accessorize the titles in the exhibit? The person asking the question says that they remind them of traditional quilt designs.
Yeah, so I designed all the main graphics and kind of aesthetic of the exhibition and the logo, and I'm a pattern maker. I'm a pattern keeper in my family. And so the triangles are a traditional motif, not only in Hawaiian culture, but in Polynesian cultures as a whole. Traditionally, they represent many different things, but specifically for the way that it's used here, it represents the movement of people, or a shark's tooth pattern, which is a common aumakua, or family guardian in Hawaiian culture. And the logo itself has the two different sets of triangles, one blue and one orange. And that's a reference to the fact that the Hawaii to Pacific Northwest diaspora is not only one way. These communities often go back and forth between each other. And so the triangles here represent the movement, but using a traditional motif to tell these contemporary stories.
Thanks for sharing. When I put together the graphic where I layered the Displaced logo on top of Nika, the artist's image of the ocean and the shore, I also noticed how the blue triangles and then the orange triangles were also like kind of reminiscent of the ocean and the land meeting each other.
That was another choice between the colors. Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that.
All right, audience, thank you so much for being here today. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat or pop on and speak your question out loud.
I don't have any questions. This is Dick Scouten on the museum board and about to leave the Board of Commissioners. I just want to thank you. It's just a wonderful show, and I've just recently been making some trips to Hawaii, and I have just the vaguest idea of this great deep culture that I'm just sort of, as a European American, have some sense of some premonition that there's a lot of deepness there. But I look forward to making more trips, and I look forward to really digging deep into the show. But I want to thank you. That's just beautiful. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm curious, given just how many gaps there are in Hawaiian history and cultural knowledge that's gotten passed down, like when you're in the process of creating, how, I mean, it feels like there's some like creative interpretation that needs to happen. And I'm kind of curious about your process with that.
Creative interpretation of what? Sorry, my audio cut out a little bit. Could you?
Oh, yeah, I guess I might not even be very clear about it, but there's, you know, like so much of our culture hasn't been like passed down. There's a lot of information that's been lost. And so I'm really curious about the process of like, you know, embodying these creative traditional practices and how you step into that when you kind of need to like patchwork things together, or there might be like information that you don't have access to, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tricky subject to navigate. You definitely don't want to do things that maybe you don't have permission to do within your community or you haven't yet earned. With these stories in particular, though, we wanted to leave it more open to questions than answer a definitive answer for everything. And maybe Kanani can share a little bit more about that too. But with the research, we definitely, like, I want to acknowledge that this is not the end all be all. These are not all of the stories. These are not all of the answers. And if anything, this exhibition was more to raise awareness that there are many more questions than we have answers for. And so we as Native people and as part of this diaspora as a whole are doing the work to patch them together, but it cannot be done just through one exhibition or through one person's research. We need to have the voices of many, many different community members involved. And what I've found through the work of this exhibition is that there are much more resources out there and people who have little tidbits of info than I ever would have thought. And it's exhibitions like these and you know, the connections that can come forth that really fuel putting these pieces together. So the work is never done. Like with my kappa practice, you know, it's about remembering and trial through error, but you definitely do have to be wary of stepping on others' feet where it's maybe not going to be welcome or appropriate. And so for those reasons, we wanted to uplift as many voices as we could and share this platform because it's not just, you know, Kanani and I's stories, it's everyone's stories that need to be shared.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Lehua, like, you know, when you were doing all of the research and finding all of the names and realizing that a lot of the names weren't documented properly. Like, I think that's where we had to kind of start being creative and like thinking of knowing, you know, being from Hawaii and knowing the culture and then like, oh, maybe this is what they were saying, you know, because it was like a more like European version of a name. So I think that we were a little creative in that aspect. And then also doing the research, like connecting with the artists, all of these little bits and pieces like kind of fit together, right? And gave us another lead.
Yeah, we were able to string together, almost like a lay, we were able to string together all these common narratives and find commonalities that led us to another part, you know, like, oh, we should include this in our research, or we need to have a page specifically about food or music to highlight. And so, yeah, and on the note of for like interpretation of our historical research, a lot of these Hawaiian names were not documented only as one singular record. A lot of these Hawaiian names were recorded as 4, 5, sometimes almost 10 different either nicknames or variations of the same Hawaiian word before there was a standardized Romanic alphabet for the Hawaiian language. And that didn't come until after the coming of the missionaries in the 1820s. And so we really had to, like Kanani said, be creative with that, but also with my own interpretation as through my own language work, speaking Olelo Hawaii, I was able to piece together some of what would have been their names, and not so much the anglicized version, but the actual name itself. In some cases we were able to do that, and in other places we specifically included the common way that it was recorded in most historical documents, because we didn't want to, again, make assumptions that were incorrect or unhelpful to our research. But yeah, it was a tricky line to navigate as curators and researchers. It looks like we have a question in the chat. What do you think of Hawaiians in the Pacific Northwest as a permanent Hawaiian subculture rather than being seen as a temporary life away from Hawaii? So many of my family and friends see their time here as temporary, even though they live here for decades. Yeah.
I know I always refer to Hawaii as home, always, even though I like being here, and Oregon is a really special place too. But I don't know. What do you think?
I was, like I mentioned earlier, I was born here in Portland, but all of my family, as far as we can trace back genealogically, we are all from the Hamakua coast of Hawaii. And so I like to say that my body was born here in Portland, but my spirit was born back home in Hawaii. And so even though while I'm physically living here in Oregon, it may be temporary, but my home is always back in Hawaii on the Big Island. But it is complicated because you never want to, I don't want to say never, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I wouldn't want to say that any place that I'm living is temporary, especially if I'm here for a decade or more, which is now my story. And so, I think we build home wherever we are. But it's complicated because that's not the story for everyone. A lot of people move away from Hawaii because of economic reasons, either seeking more job opportunities, avoiding the high cost of living in Hawaii, or they come here for college and then they end up staying for 10 years or more and building a life here and, building a family. And I don't think that's any less of an important story than those who stay in Hawaii for their whole lives. So it's really important to acknowledge the complexities of the reasons why people come and go between the two places, or why they may be rooted in one place more than the other. So I think the exhibition kind of underscores that and has different voices from kind of all different sides of the spectrum here.
All right, well, it is about 7:30, so we've got one more question to wrap us up. It is, how long was the process for all of the content for Displace, and how was the editing process for it all?
I only laugh because the kind of like the 2 weeks leading up to the exhibition opening, I was kind of going crazy with content writing and research consolidation. So the research began even before we knew that we got the show. I kind of did a little bit of research before Kanani and I submitted our proposal to the museum. So you could say that the research process began all the way back in January or February of this year. but it really definitely picked up all the research and writing part of it definitely picked up in October, September, and the first week of November as well. The editing process was very intense. As Kanani might have seen, I had so many different pieces and bits that I was including, from different artists that I found on Instagram to those that we already knew from our connections in our communities, even stuff that I found at a yard sale or an estate sale here. I found a bunch of tourist brochures and pamphlets that you'll actually see in the exhibition that found their way in, digging through archives, and then consolidating all of that into a legible, accessible exhibition. Took a lot of time because we didn't want to leave anything important out. However, we didn't want to write a PhD dissertation either. I definitely could have done that though, but I saved you guys all the reading. So yeah, it was a lot of different moving parts, and yeah, we hope that all those stories come through in a readable way for everyone who's accessing the content.
Thank you so much, Lehu and Kanani, for sharing your time with us today and speaking about the entire process of creating the exhibition and all of the consideration and work that you put into it. So that's that. Thank you everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria, for all of this.
Of course.
And thank you so much to Five Oaks Museum for this program. It's been so special to be able to share our stories.
And for everyone who came through tonight, mahalo, especially all of our contributors and artists who are in the audience. Thank you so much for lending your voices to this exhibition. We would not have been able to put this together without your stories and your work and your contributions to the ongoing stories that we're sharing and uplifting here. So mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. Please add anything that you'd like. Reach out to us. Our emails are in the exhibition. Contact us if there's anything you want to add. And yeah, we look forward to you accessing the content. Please do.